One of the fastest ways to level up your reality shifting and even manifestation game is to hone your practice of energetics. And I would say that if you don't fully trust your intuition, at least 80 to 90% of the time, then you haven't really mastered energetics. The reason I say that is because the process of feeling energy, of sensing energy, goes through almost this separate sensory system that, in my experience, closely aligns with the intuitive system. And I've talked about the neuroscience of intuition in previous episodes, so I'm not going to cover it again here because I've done that recently. And in my experience, and feel free to disagree with me in the comments if you have a different experience, to accurately be able to harness the power of energy, you need to be fully in tune with your intuitive system. And if you don't trust what your intuition is telling you, and you over rely on the external world, or people gaslighting you, or you gaslighting yourself, it happens. I've done it. And, or your logic mind, then what can happen is that you can receive the energetic broadcast and the signals, but you won't know how to decode it. And you will bucket that information if you're even awake to it. And a lot of people are not. It's almost another level of processing of information, which is why I believe that if you're still a novice at energy work, then yes, definitely do energy meditations. I provide this in my client work. If you've worked with me, I've probably given you one to enhance or to hone or to practice and to take it to the next level. But there are many people out there that offer energy meditations. And what you want to do is you want to wake up the system. But in addition to that, I would also practice intuition and hone your intuitive ability so it almost becomes second nature. And what you don't want to do is you don't want to go from one side to the other. You don't want to be all in your head, relying on your logic and your rationality, and then abandoning that strength and that skill of yours that you've built up over your lifetime and jump into the intuitive waters and forego the critical thought. And it's okay to do that sometimes, and it's okay to waddle in the intuitive waters very, very deeply, to wade in very, very deeply. You can waddle too if you feel like it. But you want to actually harness the power of both systems. And what I don't see people talking about is how people can actually be awake to energy and not be on the self-mastery journey. And this was a fundamental cognitive error that I made. It was an assumption because of my path. And I started out with personal transformation and fixing my psychology and leveling myself up, my socio-emotional and cognitive abilities. And then I had a spiritual awakening where I worked on my intuition and then my energy. So by the time I got to energy, I had already done a lot of personal work. And I made the critical error in assuming that if I had an energetic connection with somebody, that they too had done the personal work and were at a certain level of consciousness and insight. And what I have come to realize is that there are some souls that incarnated seemingly with almost these advanced abilities innately built into them, and with a lot of wisdom, and almost like they've been here before. But in this lifetime, it's almost like they're in a prison or a lock and key dampens down their power or their abilities. And some of them have very disturbed psychology. Not everybody, but some of them do. And it can take the form in many different ways of having these innate abilities, but not being able to use them appropriately, and using them for almost like the dark side, because the way they see the world is so fundamentally skewed and wounded because of this internal frustration that they have. And this is an extreme example, just to give you clarity. And there are many people that have access to these abilities that are not disturbed, but just for clarity. And they're drawn to things like leadership, or to create cults, or power, because of some innate sense of failure that they're carrying around with them. And the way that if they get there, and not everybody does, but the way that they get there and the means that they using and tapping into some of those abilities is really disturbing. And we've seen many examples of this. And so as a result, the people that they draw to them tend to also get wounded in the process, if not just outright traumatized. And it's its own mirroring that I don't want to dissect now because it'll take us too far off course. But there seems to be almost this disorientation, is what I want to say. It's one of these principles that I can see, but it's a little challenging to articulate. They need to influence. They need to have people follow them. They need worship. And they need it in such a way that they'll do anything to get it. They need to be in charge. You get the point. And so when you combine some of those abilities with those wounds, and I'm not saying that all people in power or all people in authority or influential positions are like this. I actually don't believe that is the case. I believe that there are many great leaders out there that have done the work and are conscious and have some of these abilities. I've personally seen some and met some. So I'm talking about the dark side. And so what happens is, because they're so focused on rising to those positions and not doing the work, the damage that they do has a long-term healing effect, but in the interim, it actually hurts a lot of people. And unfortunately, a lot of people sign up for that. And some people intentionally sign up for that as a way to level themselves up. And some people unintentionally do it. And their higher self usually guides them. Or, in one case in particular, there was this influencer that, I won't name names, but she was attracted to what appears to be a narcissistic cult leader. And there was an expose done on him, and he really fits the bill. Kind of an intriguing person. And she was going around giving a podcast about the experience, because she walked out of it wrecked, completely wrecked. And what's interesting, when listening to her interview, you can hear that she had this crisis moment where she was getting on a plane to go and join the cult. And she was recruited. And I won't say any more details just to protect her privacy, because I don't think she's ready to hear this. But she talks about the story of not getting on the second plane and calling a friend back home and almost in tears saying, I don't think I can go. And her friend was like, I give you permission not to go. And she decided to go. But everything in her body and everything in her intuition was telling her not to. And she went. And she unraveled. And it was really, really hard on her. She's still recovering. But all of the blame actually goes to the cult leader and not to her for not listening to her intuition, which I think is really intriguing. And had she tapped into the energetics that were available to her, because she was already on the path of awakening, she would have been able to read the room quantum style from afar and never gotten herself into that situation. But to be able to use that ability, she would have first, in my personal opinion, needed to be able to listen to her body and her intuition that were telling her it was a bad idea. And all along the way, she was having these reactions. And so her body actually got very, very dysregulated. And she started turning in circles. And she felt very trapped by her mind, and psychologically it was very, very devastating for her, because the whole time she was not listening to her intuition. Even before, she blames it on him, but even before she was in his circle of influence, she overrided her intuition, because what I believe, and this is why I want to protect her privacy, is a shadow pattern that I call the choose me shadow pattern. And that is, sometimes we are attracted to people who are, in our eyes, very successful because we want to be chosen by them. And it's at its very root a self-esteem and a self-worth issue, that we need to be given our self-worth by being chosen by somebody that is unobtainable by most people. It doesn't always work this way, but if you have a choose me wound, then it can play out in such a way that you would be drawn to somebody that was very, very prestigious, very, very well known, or in a particular area of your circle where you want to travel in, and you would compete to be chosen. And then when you're chosen, even if you're being treated poorly, you stay until it breaks you open to see the root issue. But it takes healing from the trauma and healing from the experience to be able to look inward. And first we look outward. This is normal. This is what everybody does. And so first we're angry with everybody else. And then we start to understand how we made the decision to go and how we stopped listening to ourselves. So this is what I mean by, if you're not tapped into your intuition and you're not listening to your intuition, then you're not going to be listening to the energy. All it would take is going into a meditation, shifting your consciousness to one of this person's events, or if they have a projection system set up that it's not super important, but there are ways to ping people energetically in the field. And so you can interface with them and you can get an energetic preview, and you don't even have to know them. You don't even have to pick up the phone and call them. You can actually just tag them and see, how does it feel? And if you get a sickly feeling from it, then it's advised not to shift there. And you have to, it's a little complicated because you have to make sure that the space-time continuum matches. And so you could ping theoretically any timeline. So it takes a little bit of practice. Like, let's say you're trying to ping a certain person energetically. If you're not conscious and intentional about how you are interfacing with them, you could receive a signal back that is in a parallel world that you can't actually access for some time. So it's not the only means of communication, but it is a piece of information that you can use in addition to seeing how you feel after you see one of their talks. Like, this is the other thing about this particular person, is that she would try to listen to one of his talks and she would fall asleep. She wasn't actually resonating with his teachings. And so there are multiple data points that you can examine to really be sure that what you're getting yourself into is appropriate for you. And energetics is an important one. So after you have a Zoom call with a potential client or employer, doing an energy read on how that felt for you. Because sometimes people are very nice and very charming, but it feels like a vampiric connection. And to just take a client or to take a job just because you want it or because you need it is something you can do, or you can be intentional about cueing in to how it really feels. So for example, I had an opportunity that I ended up declining. I've had a couple actually, because I couldn't imagine going to dinner with this person. And the opportunity was a business opportunity that would require a lot of time working together and running events and things of that nature, and spending, weekends doing that. And literally, I did not want to spend time with them because I did not enjoy their company. We met in person to talk about some of these events, and it didn't feel right, that we didn't actually vibe. And because I was still a little early in this practice, it is a practice, and it's something to continuously work on. But because I was still early, I said yes. And I went through the motions, all the while checking in with myself and realizing that the further I went down that path, the more I didn't like it, and it wasn't working, and I backed out. And it was probably hurt my reputation as a professional because I backed out after we had things planned. And it didn't harm anybody, but it definitely threw the plans for this person sideways. And I didn't really apologize for that. So it takes time on the self-mastery journey to realize these things, but it's very, very important to listen. And so when you don't listen and you override your intuition or you override your energy, then you can get yourself into some epic failures that could be avoided.